ask you about the sanctions story, Secretary. The Senate reached a bipartisan agreement on a new round of sanctions against Russia for its meddling in the 2016 election and its military activities in Ukraine and Syria. You've been working on sanctions now since you took office. What's your take on the bipartisan sanctions deal?
Well, let me just comment in general, Maria, that I think sanctions in general are a very effective tool for the government, and we will use them to the maximum amount available by law. We're focused on North Korea, we're focused on Iran, we're focused on Syria, and we'll focus on Russia as well. But these are very, very important tools, and we're working very closely with Secretary Tillerson, Secretary Mattis, and General McMaster on how we use sanctions across our policies. Do they work? There's a debate about this, Secretary Mnuchin. Some people say sanctions don't work. I mean, some people feel that the sanctions didn't work in Russia. Maria, I don't think there's any debate about it. They clearly worked in Iran, which is the most significant issue where we and our allies came together. It's the only reason why Iran came to the table to negotiate. I think, as we've said before, we think there was a better deal, and there's no question they worked, and there's no question locking up $100 billion had a big impact. Yeah. Well, do you find it odd that Dennis Rodman is going to North Korea? I'm not going to comment on that one, but there's a bunch of things that I find odd that people do. I know that this is not part of any government, idea to send Dennis Rodman to North Korea, but he's going there, and he says he wants to open the door. Meanwhile, the U.S. is talking about sanctions against North Korea. Is there a catalyst that you could point to identify what it is that actually trips up these sanctions, that gets this conversation hot again? Again, I think there's a general recognition of the importance of sanctions and that they work. And sanctions are primarily done by the executive branch, and they're a huge part of foreign policy. They work, we'll continue to use them, and we think they're very important tools. The Journal today is reporting that the administration is asking Beijing to actually, take impact if there are companies that are dealing with North Korea, individuals that are transacting with North Korea. Why is this the right move? Well, Maria, I'm not going to comment on the specifics of that, but what I will say is, President Trump and President Xi, we had a terrific meeting in Mar-a-Lago. They've had several conversations since then. I've had several conversations with my counterparts. We're very focused on having China work with us on North Korea. They are going to be part of the solution there, and it's important that we work together. And we're also very focused on our economic agenda and shrinking the trade balance by increasing exports with China. What other changes should we expect in terms of government and in terms of jobs? You still have a lot of open positions in terms of the roles that you need within government. And then, of course, there's the IRS, Secretary. I want to get your take on this because a lot of people are scratching their heads why John Koskinen still has a job running the IRS. The Treasury Department oversees the IRS. Are you going to get rid of the head of the IRS after all of the targeting that they did to conservatives? Well, Maria, let me just make a comment in general on jobs. And I know that, people have said about we haven't filled jobs. We've actually identified people for almost every single open job. And right now, they all have to go through an FBI background process that's obviously time-consuming. And I can assure you we have lots of people for all these different jobs that we're going to put into government. And several of them are already in front of the Senate for confirmation. We got a great team here at Treasury. We have an incredible career staff, but we got a great team that we're bringing in, and we got lots of people that want to work here, and we're getting these jobs processed as quickly as we can through security clearances and background checks. What about the IRS? Will the president take out the John Koskinen from the IRS after him targeting conservative groups? Again, we have lots of people we've interviewed for the IRS. We have several people in mind. We're working through a process there. All right, let me ask you where we began, and we'll end it where we began, Secretary, and that is your rollback in regulations. What do you think will be the direct result of this rollback in regulations? I mean, what do you see happening as a result of these changes in terms of moving the $50 billion threshold up, in terms of alleviating capital restrictions on some of the small banks? Do you think the lending part of the story picks up? Maria, I think, as you know, we measure everything we're doing here
in how it impacts economic growth, how it impacts jobs, how it impacts wages for Americans. And as I said, we think there's three components to this: tax reform, regulatory relief, and trade. And on the regulatory relief, we're focused here on financial regulations. There's other parts of the government that are focused on other undue and unnecessary regulations. But we're going to unlock growth in this economy, get us back to 3% where we should be.
Secretary, we look forward to that very much. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much.